Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. It is June 14th, 2020, and you are now watching Real Talk with Ronnie. Here on our show, we only engage in real talk, real news, in real time. Today on Real Talk, my exclusive guest is Mike Reyes. Mike Reyes is an entrepreneur and political activist. His past experience includes corporate training, teaching tech sales, and political canvassing. After graduating from the University of Rhode Island with a double degree in political science and Spanish literature in 2009, Mike went on to pursue a master's degree in admin management at Zhejiang University on a full Chinese government scholarship. When President Donald Trump won in 2016, Mike decided that the time had come to return to his birthplace, New York City. Since his return, he has worked on several different political campaigns, both at the local and national level, and worked for the Manhattan Republican Party during the 2018 midterm election. He is now on the executive board of the newly revamped Harlem Republican Club, where he serves as chairman. In the private sector, he has worked in green energy sales, tech sales, and is now an entrepreneur in the healthcare tech space. He has appeared on Fox News, ABC News, the New York Post, and NY1. At present, Mike is fundraising for his startup while volunteering for various political campaigns throughout New York City. We are very happy to have him on our show tonight, where we discussed many pressing issues that are affecting America today. In particular, we discuss his transition from a Democrat to a Republican and what it is like being a black conservative in America. Furthermore, we discuss the current protests and riots that are plaguing the U.S. as a result of George Floyd's death at the hands of police. The issue of race relations right now in the United States is at a tipping point, with distrust in law enforcement among the black community at an all-time high. Let me be clear, the death of George Floyd was tragic, reckless, and unnecessary, and the hurt that is being felt by the black community is raw, real, and justified. The ensuing protests that have lit up in most major cities in the U.S. have rocked the nation amid America's ongoing battle against COVID-19. However, protests are a part of America's history and fabric. After all, the right to protest is guaranteed in our Constitution. That being said, though, what isn't needed and is not justified are the senseless, horrific, and violent looting and rioting that have commandeered the initial purpose and point of the protests, which is to bring justice for George Floyd. Many of these so-called protesters couldn't even tell you who George Floyd is. They are instead using this tragic incident as an excuse to steal, rob, and cause chaos. And this is just plain wrong and unacceptable. Our leaders from both sides of the aisle, and the mainstream media in particular, need to come together and heal our nation instead of antagonizing this tragic situation for political gain and power. With that being said, I now present to you my interview with Mike Reyes. Okay, so good evening, everybody. Thank you for joining me tonight, and thank you for joining me on my exclusive interview with my good friend, Mike Reyes. Mike Reyes is an entrepreneur. He's a very bright guy. He currently resides in New York City, and he has a lot of things going on. So I'm not going to talk too much. I will let Mike do the talking for himself. Okay, so Michael, thanks for being on my show.
Thanks for having me. So, just to briefly introduce myself, I work in politics. I'm the head of the Republican Party here in Harlem, in Upper West Side Manhattan, and I run a healthcare and tech startup. I've been on interview with Fox News, local news ABC, NY1, newspaper articles, and the New York Post, and just keep pushing through. I'm working for the Trump 2020 campaign as well. I'm doing all this, and I'm also an amateur rugby player, which takes up a lot of my spare time. I got to get that anger management out somehow.
Right. Okay, so Mike, judging by what you just said, you have a lot going on. You have a lot on your plate. You're currently also working for the Trump campaign on, I guess, a part-time basis, correct?
Yes, it's more so volunteer for local campaigns. In New York City, we have certain areas that are more conservative. Staten Island, a few campaigns there, 2 or 3 campaigns there. And going into the convention as well, I'll be doing more work. I'm actually traveling to Austin for a conference, leadership conference, the first weekend of August, called the Young American Leadership Conference for Conservatives.
Okay,
Gonna
great.
go there, network, fun times. Yeah, and
Okay.
just see how I can better help serve in Texas for the more national level, Texas and Florida.
Right, right. We all know that Texas is currently not a swing state yet, but it's almost getting there, right?
Yeah, look at the Beto election results with in 2018,
Right.
right? It's tough because the problem with Texas and Florida, specifically Texas first, is that a lot of Californians that are very, very liberal are moving down to Texas.
Right.
And then with Florida, a lot of New Yorkers who are very liberal are moving down to Florida, right?
Right.
You know AOC, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez? Her mother, who is a lifelong Democrat, was always voted for Democrats, she recently moved down to Florida to, pay low taxes. But people like that, what they usually end up doing is voting for people that made their states, really bad to begin with.
Right.
So there's not much logic in it. It's the reality of the situation right now.
Okay, so to let the viewers in on what we were just talking about, so we all know that traditionally Texas has been a very red state, right? It has been one of the most reliable red states that presidential candidates can rely on in presidential races. However, in recent years, especially during the last two cycles, Texas is increasingly becoming, inching towards a purplish state, correct? And that's what we said, right? Yeah, and it's because, and the reason it's becoming a purplish state is because you have a lot of migrants from California going over to Texas. Well, when I say migrants, what I mean is citizens who live in California, who are residents there, but have chose to migrate and change their residency to Texas. And as we know, California is probably one of the most liberal states in the U.S.
The most liberal state, probably.
Yeah. I believe it's the world's fifth largest economy, right? Yeah, it's the fifth largest, but in terms of political stance, it is the most liberal state in the U.S. So we see a lot of transplants. Sorry, the word I was looking for before was transplant. We see a lot of California transplants that are in Texas right now. And those people, right, these citizens are the ones who are sort of driving Texas into a more liberal direction. So that's why a lot... Sorry?
No, it's not like interject and just go further because I just recently found out in New York State, you do not require citizenship to get a voter's ID registration.
Right.
So I think that certain areas in Texas as well, the Democrats are really pushing for that. So first-generation immigrants tend to be, except for the Asian diaspora, Latin America, Europe, they tend to be more Democrat voting, even though they may be conservative, right? Latin American people are Catholic. They're anti-abortion. They come to open businesses at higher rates than native-born Americans, so they're pro-business. So even though they're conservative, they tend to vote Democrat. So that might be another reason why Texas is turning purple as well. And Florida to an extent, but Florida has more of a Cuban dynamic, and they're very staunch Republican.
Right.
Historically.
Well, Florida is the perennial swing state, right? In every presidential race, it's always the swing state to watch, and it's caused a lot of trouble, a lot of problems for both candidates, for both sides, right?
Yeah, definitely. Most recently, 2000 with Bush and the vice president of Bill Clinton. What was his name again? Al Gore. Yeah, that one. Al Gore. That one was a big.
Yeah, I'm sure between Al Gore and Florida, there's no love lost, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, but I'm sure.
A lot of things happen, right? You don't want to. You can't tell the future, right? But at the time, I guess it sucked. But looking back at it in retrospect, I think that he's been more successful in the private sector, and he didn't have to deal with terrorist attacks and all that stuff,
Right. Yeah. I mean, from a private sector point of view, Al Gore has certainly flourished. His venture into media has definitely garnered him a lot of money, right?
I think he's worth around $250 million. $250 million at the moment.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's the way it works in politics, right? You start off poor, you work in politics, and then by the time you get out of politics, you go into the private sector and you become filthy rich.
Trump is the opposite. He's losing money by being president. He's not even accepting a salary.
Yeah.
A lot of people might not know. He donates his salary to agencies in the government.
Right. Well, I mean, in Trump's case, in President Trump's case, it's a very different sort of situation, right? And I read that President Trump, if you take his net worth combined, he is worth more than all past presidents combined. So he definitely.
Even though that's basically something that has to do in today's money, but I think that if you were to change everything to like today's money, because Kennedy's father was, I don't know if you knew this, he was top 10 richest people in the world at one point.
Yeah, but I think
Right?
that figure. Yeah, no, but I think the figure that I read, I think that is adjusted for today's inflation rate. Yeah, but I'm not sure if our viewers know this, but actually George Washington was filthy rich. I think I think George Washington is actually the richest president after Donald Trump.
Yeah, he was extremely, extremely wealthy. Yeah.
Right. And of course, most of its wealth, I believe, comes from his land holdings. And yeah, because he owned a lot of land. Yeah. Okay, so Mike, so a question that I know our viewers are dying to know, and it's the elephant in the room. Michael, you are black, Latino, yet you're conservative, and you live in New York City. How does that work?
Well, my parents, like I said, are Dominican American. Their views have always been really conservative, despite the fact that they were Democrats.
Right.
When I became a teen, I wanted to remain independent until when I turned 24, I became a Democrat in order to work on a campaign in New York City. It's the law here that if you want to canvass for somebody that's a Democrat, take signatures down, you have to be a Democrat. So it's never really a strong Democrat. But again, my family views have always been very conservative. Both my parents, strong border security,
Right.
low tax, pro-business. My mom owns a business. My father, when he was here, owned a business. Anti-abortion, strongly anti-abortion. In fact, there's a lot of family members and friends who are voting for Donald Trump solely on the fact of that policy that he's very strongly, except for he's an incest and rape. He's anti-abortion.
Right.
So what really got me into becoming a Republican per se is the fact that I was living in China in 2016 when Trump won, and I saw that a lot of jobs were come back to the U.S. And I came back here and I was like, I like a lot of what Trump's doing. And I decided that I wanted to become a Republican and support the cause. And the few things that I really liked in the past few years that he's done is the First Steps Act, where he's releasing a lot of prisoners from jail for nonviolent crimes,
Right.
put in prison. He's taking funding for historically black colleges and made it permanent. Before Trump, historically black colleges had to go every year to Congress to ask for more money. They no longer have to do that.
Right.
Two other things is anti-human trafficking in inner cities is a huge problem. People don't know this, especially with black and Latino people in poor neighborhoods. In the Bronx,
Right.
about every 8 black kids, girls between 14 to 16 go missing. They never be found again. What happens is they get trafficked, they get into that life, they use pimps use them for 2 years, then they get people to chop them up and take their organs out, or basically organ harvesting.
Right.
And lastly, it's his opportunity zone policy, which I work in. In historically impoverished neighborhoods, in the suburbs and in the cities, he's worked with Tim Scott, look consider Tim Scott, to establish opportunity zones where people of high net worth or businesses can go in there and get tax benefits for creating jobs and affordable housing. That's huge. And the problem that the Republican Party has really had is that they're bad at marketing. The Democratic Party is extremely good at marketing. Despite all of this, the Democrats, what they're doing is that they're attacking Trump and calling him a racist, even though there's not really much evidence to support that he's a racist. I mean, you see pictures of him in the 90s with tons of, even up until he ran for president in 2016 as a Republican, there were tons of people that supported him. Spike Lee, huge Trump supporter, Oprah, they've all distanced themselves and called him a racist.
Right. Well, that's how it goes in politics. Politics is a very, it's an ever-changing game, and you're hot one minute, but maybe cold the next with a certain group of people. So, Mike, at what point did you officially decide that you were going to switch over and become a Republican? Because as you stated, right, you weren't always a Republican. You were a Democrat, and albeit maybe a moderate Democrat, right? A moderate Democrat.
Yeah.
So then, at what point were you like, okay, I've had it with the modern Democratic Party. I'm going to go the other route and be Republican. What was the turning point?
The Trump Revolution. The Trump Revolution. Remember that Trump was a Republican at first, then he was a Democrat, then he was a Reform Party for a while, and then switched back to the Republican Party. And
Right.
Reagan as well was a Democrat, and and then he became a Republican later in his life, like in his 30s.
Right. Well, I think.
Trump.
Yeah, I think in Trump's case, I think the majority of his adult, life, he's been a Democrat. We know that he's donated to Hillary Clinton, to Bill Clinton, to many of the Democratic campaigns, right?
But
so
he also campaigned for George H.W. Bush in the early 90s too. People don't know that. Late 80s, early 90s.
Yeah, so...
He actually started as a Republican, but yeah, you're right. He was a Democrat for more years and he was a Republican, but he was also a Reform Party candidate for a long time.
Yeah, he was thinking about running for president, I believe back in 96 or 2000 when he thought about being
way back in the day.
a Reform Party candidate. But luckily for him, he decided not to, because I think if he had ran back then he wouldn't... Right, well, he would have lost, and B, I think it would have marginalized him into being like a not so serious candidate. Even though but the funny part is when he actually did run in 2016 as a Republican, a lot of Republicans and Democrats and actually everybody had dismissed him, right, as a sort of like a joke candidate.
Yeah.
But then he came back to prove everybody wrong. Okay, so but to answer your question about Democrats, well, not really your question, but your comment before about how Democrats are better at marketing. I think they're better at marketing, but I think that's primarily because they have the backing of the mainstream media. I mean, if you have the mainstream media as your mouthpiece, then it's pretty much clear sailing, right?
Yeah, I think there's a reason for that. I don't know this, but a lot of these companies are indirectly owned by Chinese companies. Even, for example, with NBA, did you know that the American population, the population of the whole U.S. is 300 million people? China's market for the NBA, there's 500 million fans in the Chinese market alone.
Right.
It's almost twice the size of the U.S. population. So you think LeBron James really cares about racism? No, that comes out of racism. He knows that. And why doesn't he complain about racism in China? That's obvious there. Right, you have Muslim concentration camps. Look what they did to the black people in Guangzhou, capital city, right? They're kicking them out of their housing. They're not letting them go to restaurants to eat. Trying to deport them. The mainstream media in the same way. Hollywood too. Hollywood makes more money in per capita in China than do in the U.S. for the movies that are released there. So they're hurting their pockets. Trump's hurting their pockets. It's helping the American people because it's bringing factory workers, factory jobs back. It's helping the middle America, flower country.
Right.
As some like to suggest. The average American, but it's hurting the elites. And the elites don't really care about the average American, let's be honest. There's books been written about this. Tucker Carlson's Two Fools. The elites live in their bubble.
Right.
They take their own jets. They go to baseball games. They go into their own boxes. They don't associate with the average American on a daily basis. They might do it for a photo op, but it's not like the 80s, 70s where wealthy Americans used to take first-class flights. They used to still see people. They used to still stay in average hotels. You can have somebody next to you in the next hotel next to you that was Bill Gates, for example, in the late 80s or early 90s. No big deal. But now they live in their own bubbles. They don't care about the average American, and they just see that their dollars are becoming less and less because Trump's tax policy in China.
All right. Just to add to your point before about liberal mainstream media, I think another point to consider as to why media is predominantly so liberal is because they have a kind of symbiotic relationship with Democratic, politicians. Democrats, they campaign, they fundraise from these liberal media companies, right, from those CEOs. They give them money, and in return, these Democrats have to favor these stations or these companies or these media, channels. So
the policy actions, for example, FCC, right? They control everything.
Right. So it's kind of like a symbiotic thing. So it's easy to understand why media always skews towards left. But what's not easy for me to see is why people are always so like, oh my gosh, didn't you see on CNN or on MSNBC this clip of like Donald Trump or of this candidate and what they said? They're so like out of touch. And when they say that to me,
Charlottesville?
Sorry?
You mean like Charlottesville, right? Charlottesville. You know that video?
Right.
They said both. Did you watch the whole video? At the end, he actually denounces white supremacy. But every CNN show that shows that video cuts right before he denounces white supremacy.
Right. Well, it's not just that. I mean, everything that Trump says or Republicans say or do, these media outlets, they have a way of just cutting it out just at the right moment, or editing it to a point where it seems like they're saying what they're trying to imply that they say. But what I like to say to everyone who's watching right now is that you need to watch the source material, because at the end of the day, channels and outlets like CNN and MSNBC and even Fox News, right, and even Fox News, these are, they're more editorial than they are news.
They're businesses. They're
right.
stock market listed.
Right. Well, I would say, yeah. I mean, I would say that
they want their stocks. People that hold their stock want to make money, right?
Right.
When you're a stock market listed company, it's all about the stock going up and down.
Yeah. I mean, for companies like CNN, it's very blatant that they're more about commentary than they are about news reporting.
No, they pass their opinion as fact. That's a problem. Because in Fox News, they'll tell you, you see all the commercials, generally speaking, they'll let you know it's opinion.
Right.
Their new thing in New York City on the buses, maybe they take it off now, 2016 definitely, was like hard news, real opinion, right? But Fox News, I'm going to tell you, comes to racist. As is a fact, and CNN never says, oh, this is not aligned, or, because even in Britain, you can't say things like that. You can't just call a president a racist. The First Amendment is great, but the First Amendment protects journalism.
Right.
So that the First Amendment, they can lie on TV, and they're protected by the First Amendment.
And especially when they...
And
right. And especially when they lie about a public figure, because the threshold for slander when it comes to a public figure is very, very high. So, of course, these stations can say whatever they want about public figures such as President Trump or various politicians, right? So, I mean, I think there comes a time where some of these channels, these media outlets need to be held accountable for what they say. Because they are, I mean, and they do this, they are influencing the minds of the next generation. And they are continuously propagating fake news.
They were supporting Antifa. Like, even that Lemon, he was saying, that Lemon, all of them, they were saying Antifa's anti-fascist. They didn't condemn them. But one point I wanted to add, this is very important. A lot of people don't know this. I think you know this because you're a lawyer, or an attorney, right? I'm not sure which term you want to use, but these liberals, like, the owners of Twitter and Facebook, how they're, how they're very liberal, they like to donate to, like, Democrat candidates, wealthier people in New York City, lawyers, people that have... Or you really think that they're okay with raising taxes? They're okay with raising taxes because they know how to cheat the system. They don't pay taxes. I'm sure you know this. This is a fact. If you own a company, it can be a shell company, a fake company, and you buy a Ferrari, you don't pay any tax on it. If you're a citizen, obviously, if you can afford any car you buy a Toyota, you pay tax on it.
Right.
Apartments, it goes for anything. So they know how to cheat the system. So these liberals that say, oh yeah, we're for the middle class, we're for raising taxes, they're not going to pay taxes. You're going to pay taxes. You're not going to pay taxes. The middle class are going to pay taxes.
All right, so Mike, so let me ask you this question. Being a black Latino, black conservative, you must get a lot of pushback from people. A lot of people must look at you and must be like, what are you thinking, right? I mean, if you look at what Joe Biden said a couple of weeks ago, he said that if you have any problem, well, he was talking to blacks, right? He was saying that if you have a problem deciding who you want to vote for, then you ain't black, right? So I guess that, and of course he has gotten a lot of pushback and a lot of blowback for that comment. But I think that is the sense of maybe arrogance that the Democratic Party has been showing, or has been holding for many, many years, right?
I think he might have forgotten he was being recorded, by the way.
No, but my point is, that is the type of liberal attitude that I believe a lot of Democrats hold. They feel like you ought to, or because you look this way, because you're from this part of the world, because you're this skin color, because you're from this socioeconomic income bracket, then you need to vote this particular way. And if you don't fall in line, then obviously, clearly, there's something wrong with you, or as Joe Biden says, clearly, you ain't black. And I think that is maybe one of the most egregious and denigrating things that anyone can ever say. What are your thoughts?
It was blatant, obviously. Just want to point this out. But he blatantly said it, and mainstream media defended him. Trump doesn't say anything that crazy. They take him out of context, and they say, okay, Trump's a racist. I remember there was a campaign rally in Rhode Island where somebody was starting trouble, a Caucasian person starting trouble in the audience, and he was like, take him out of here, get him out of here. Back in the day, we would do this to them, people like that, right? He was joking. It wasn't anything like crazy, like hang. I forgot what the actual terminology was. But they took that recording of his voice, and they recorded it over a beating of a black man by KKK members. That was a campaign ad.
Right. Well.
So you see, that's how bad it is. And that's what Biden has said. Biden has said some pretty crazy stuff in the '90s when he was talking about the crime bill that imprisoned lots of black people. He said, "quote There are predators on the street." The continuation was, "and they're beyond the pale." End quote.
All right.
That's pretty bad. And he was also against school integration because he didn't want his kids to be raised in a quote unquote multiracial jungle. Again, Democrats get defended for this.
All right.
Me personally, my mom wasn't a Trump supporter at first because he has a pretty strong personality, but she's seen things like her medicine bills dropped,
right.
like that, insurance dropped in price, and because she's seen me and she's seen the passion I have for Trump, and she's seen the things that I pointed out to her, she's a Trump supporter. Yes, I do get flack, but there are a lot of secret Republicans, a lot of blacks and Latinos that they'll text me online or they'll send me a WhatsApp message like, I agree with what you're saying. Just make sure you don't mention my name whenever you talk to somebody.
Right.
Because you never know, right? But there's a lot of black and Latinos that feel the same way that I feel.
Yeah, and I'm sure, you have a lot of people who say, oh my gosh, Mike, you are black and Latino, yet you vote Republican. You are an Uncle Tom. I mean, have you ever been called that before?
Uncle Tom? No. Because I'm pretty big and black, and people are going to say things like that. They say things like, oh, could you support Trump? They make up statistics. Yes, statistics. One statistic that they love, that one of my teammates took this fight, is that, he's Asian American like you, but he's somehow a Democrat liberal. Maybe it's because he's from England, and they're socialists over there, right? Openly socialist. So, the point was, again, yes. He specifically told me that, Trump's supporting immigrants and Latino people like crazy. How can you support him? I'm like, these were policies that were brought over from the Obama administration. To each point of Trump's presidency to today, this is a fact, Obama has deported more people than Trump. From the presidency, compared to year by year.
Yep. But, of course...
The child staging policy, that was actually started by Obama, and Trump stopped it. But again, the mainstream media is framing it as the day one that Trump came in. It just suddenly began, and Trump has continued. You actually stopped that. There's no more kids in cages anymore. Right.
But of course, if all you watched was CNN, you wouldn't know that, right? You would think, oh my gosh, Trump's policies have put children in cages, and actually, those pictures were actually taken during the Obama era. But of course, the mainstream media, they conveniently leave that part out. So, Mike, we were talking about the, various pushback and the incredulity that people get when they see that you're a Republican. I myself, I'm a conservative, right? I'm not like a hardcore conservative. I'm more of like a, moderate when it comes to social issues. So there are policies and agendas from both sides that I can back. I mean, I personally used to work for Democrats. I was an intern for my state's governor, for my state's senator, for my state's congressman. So I was very in that whole Democratic crowd. And the people that I worked with back then, they were all super nice, right? I have no bad things to say about them. That's how it should be in the U.S. Both sides should be able to work together. But now
right. Yeah, they work together all the time.
Yeah, but now, unfortunately, we've devolved into such a toxic sort of, environment where if you kind of don't believe in one little thing that the other party says, then you're automatically labeled a racist or a bigot or whatever, right?
That's how me, man.
Yeah.
Latino with immigrant parents, that's what
right, and I have a lot of people saying to me too, they ask me, they're like, whoa, Ronald, your parents are immigrants. how can you possibly like Trump's policies, right? He is so anti, immigration, blah, blah, blah. And I have to cut them off. I'm like, no, no. Trump is anti-illegal immigration. There's a big difference, right? He's anti-illegal immigration. He is all for legal immigration. And I think that's what every president...
Same exact policy as Obama.
Right, and I think, that is a policy that I think every president has followed and should follow. Yeah, I mean, there are video clips out there of President Bill Clinton, President Barack Obama, Nancy Pelosi, Chuck Schumer, condemning
everybody
the problem with illegal immigrants, right? So back then they condemned it when it was a Democrat president. It was the biggest problem, right? They all said immigration should be legal. We are a country of law and order.
But even when George was in power, there was still bipartisan consensus.
Right.
They just really don't like Trump. Let's be honest.
Yeah. So I mean, back then, the common sense approach was to be against illegal immigration because that is a strain on our society. It is a strain on our taxpayers' dollars, and it's a strain on our resources. But now, and I think a lot of this pushback on illegal immigration is mostly due to liberal hatred of Trump. I think that's fueling this, right? If it was any other president, I think if you take a liberal or any liberal or a Democrat and you sat them down and you talk to them, they would also see that illegal immigration is wrong and we do have a border problem.
Definitely. I mean, Obama declared a border problem too.
Yeah.
But I think that it's more, again, specifically against Trump issue because even Speaker Paul Ryan and, because there are no Republicans left, the anti-Trump Republicans left. Let's be honest, right? When Trump came into power, the Republicans didn't like him, the Democrats didn't like him. Now we're getting more Republican. The senators are kind of like, hey, he's in power, he's the same party, let's support him. The Democrats are more kind of like,
Yeah.
Well, I mean, they just don't like Trump at all. Anything he does, even if it's something good, they don't like it, right? They have to take the opposing side. But specifically for me, like, the thing that I see is with Democrats and Republicans, I work with both parties, Democrats and Republicans to this day, in my startup, and in general life. I don't have a problem against Democrats. I disagree with a lot of their views. My views personally are, I'm pro-gay rights, pro-gay marriage, I'm strongly pro-gun, I'm for low taxes, and these are generally views that people can get behind. Except for low taxes, I don't know, some people are a bit weird on that. Again, some elite Democrats want to pay more taxes, but they really want middle class to more taxes. But social studies speaking, like, Democrats are not as talented as Republicans are Democrats. Republicans think Democrats are wrong. Democrats think Republicans are evil. Again, that goes with the marketing.
Yeah,
Democrats vote for us because that side sucks. Republicans vote for us because we have better policies, right? Generally speaking, that's what it's like.
Yeah, I mean, to reiterate my previous point, so yeah, I tend to agree with viewpoints from both sides, right? I think both sides, in a normal climate, in a normal world, both sides have issues and have points. Right, both sides have points that make sense. But, nowadays, I am just so fed up with the blatant, fake, made-up news coming out from the mainstream media. I mean, it's so blatant. Like, you don't even have to think twice. It's just literally fake. But they pass it off as real. And what really gets to me is when people believe this, and then they challenge me about it. And then, and they say this kind of stuff, and then I have to be on defensive. Like, I have to defend a fake news that isn't even real.
Again, Ronald, the Democratic Party, I mean, on both sides, but more nowadays, the fake news are coming out with Trump, like the Charlottesville fake videos and all that stuff. They'll believe anything. Anything. So, that's the problem with Photoshop now and technology. Even when something, like I said before we started recording, I'm working for a candidate, I signed on Joe Calderon. His opponent, just to give him background information, San Juan is a very conservative area, very pro-Trump. It's the only place in New York City where Trump won by a landslide 2-1. That's what they call it. Every two Trump supporters, there's one non-Trump supporter. Joe Caldera has always consistently supported Trump. His opponent was on video in a news interview saying she doesn't support Trump, she never supported Trump, and she supported Marco Rubio, one of the contenders. And she believes that if Marco Rubio would have won the presidency, we'd be in a better spot right now. Despite that, there are still people that I call. I tell them this video exists, and they say the video is fake. It has been altered. So on both sides, Republican and Democrat, people will say that something's fake if they disagree with it. They'll say something, and they'll do the inverse as well. If something is facts, they'll say it's fake facts, even if it's a fact, right? So.
Yeah, but I think the irony in this whole thing is that Democrats and liberals, because I have a lot of Democrat friends. You know, I went to Brandeis University. It's in Waltham. It's in Massachusetts. It's in the heart of liberal, U.S. It's in Massachusetts. It's in Kennedy country, right? So I have a lot of liberal friends. So I'm used to being gang attacked by all of them when I espouse my conservative views, right? So I'm fine with it, right?
And that's why you and I are better debaters because of that.
But what really gets to me, right, and what gets to me, and the irony of this whole thing is when Democrats, and especially now, when Democrats and liberals, when they have the audacity to say, oh, all Trump supporters are so brainwashed, they'll believe anything and everything that Trump tells them. However, they don't look at themselves. They literally will believe anything and everything that CNN tells them, and they will believe and swear to God that is real news. So, I mean, there are probably some Trump supporters that will believe anything and everything that Trump says, right? And it doesn't matter if it's real or not. But, I think you can find those people on both sides. So I think the irony in this whole thing,
I'm not attacking Democrats.
Yeah, the irony of this whole thing is that, the Democrats are pointing at you saying, oh, you're so gullible, when they themselves are believing the same gullible news, but just with a different spin.
Again, we believe that they're wrong, and sometimes we believe their opinion's different. They believe we're evil. Right. That's the difference. Yeah,
and I think the biggest difference between a conservative and a fanatic liberal is that a conservative will disagree with a liberal and will try to, see the argument, right? And the point of view, right? Right. However, the fanatic liberal, the rabid liberal, will just maybe attack you and call you racist. Because
again, if you perceive somebody as evil, you can't even have a conversation with them, right? Because they're evil.
Right. And again, I think this is part of the bigger picture and the bigger problem, which is that a lot of these liberals, they're self-righteous. They think that they're right. And because they think they're right, I don't know why they get this false sense of of this entitlement where they think they're right, where they get this false sense of virtue where they think they're completely right. But because they somehow think this, then that also makes it okay for them to attack you verbally and physically. We've seen a lot of video clips and a lot of news stories where Republicans on campus, Republicans who are peacefully running their stall or their stand on a campus fair, they get attacked, right? They get attacked for no reason, right? And, God forbid a conservative were to do this to a liberal. Oh my gosh, if a conservative were to attack a college Democrat, booth, the next day, the next day, CNN and MSNBC would be raiding down on that campus and blaming Trump. They would be saying, oh, Trump, because of your rhetoric, you have sown the seeds of discord and hatred, into the very fabric of this country. And it's all your fault.
Yeah, and people are going around burning buildings, and they're saying that while they're burning these buildings, after they burn them, they're like, oh yeah, Trump is destroying the country. So your response to him destroying the country with zero evidence is you going on destroying the country.
Right.
Does that make any logical sense?
Okay, no, not at all. Okay, all right, Michael, let's move on to probably the most pressing issue that has faced Americans in a very long time, which is what's happening right now, currently, with the rioting and the protesting over the death of George Floyd. So what are your thoughts on that?
My personal views on this, they're very complex, but I'll start saying I agree with people's right to protest, First Amendment right. I 100% agree. I do not agree with rioting, first off. Second, again, people can protest all they want. Me personally, and the George Floyd death, I think that shouldn't have happened. I know he was a criminal. He had fentanyl, he was high, but that cop shouldn't have killed him. I disagree with that. Regardless of what color he was, that shouldn't have happened. So to protest that specific situation, that killing, yes. But to say all cops are bad, no, it's not a good idea. And also, the cop wasn't racist. He was just a jerk. Because he had a partner that was black, he had a partner that was Asian, his wife is Asian. He is not a racist cop. He was just being a jerk. That's my take on that specific situation.
Right. Okay, so I mean, basically, I think everyone is in agreement in that it was a death that was tragic. It should not have happened, right? And just to walk back on a point that you said that George Floyd was a criminal. Well, I mean, we don't know that, right? I mean, everyone is innocent until proven guilty. The reason
he was arrested a few times before and stuff. He had problems.
Okay. So he has some issues with the law, right? But okay, so that day when the police were called over to investigate this incident, it was because apparently or allegedly he had tried to pass a $20 fake note, correct? Right. And in the ensuing activities that followed, I think we can all agree that the level of force that the policeman had exerted was excessive and aggressive and unnecessary. So I think everyone is in agreement. I mean, that is probably.
Video? Like, this is the angle video, by the way. Did you see it? Where actually it looked like they took him down, like he wasn't resisting arrest at any moment.
Right.
Did you see the video?
No, well, yeah, I've seen parts of the video, but I read somewhere that apparently he had fallen to the ground. He had fallen to the ground, right?
He wasn't resisting arrest.
Right, he had fallen to the ground, and then at that point, I don't know why it was necessary to put a knee on the back of his neck. I mean, he was not going to flee, right? I mean, it's a very different case than what happened a few days ago at the Wendy's in Atlanta, Georgia, right? I'm sure you've heard about that.
Yeah. So for the Wendy's case, I saw the video on the Ben Shapiro show yesterday, and the gentleman was drunk driving, basically. They were talking for 25 minutes. The cops were very respectful. When they tried to arrest him, he strangled the cops, both cops, pushed him to the ground, stole a taser, ran away from the cop, and tried to hit the cop. What else? Some people are saying it's excessive force, both from Democrats and Republicans. But what else was he supposed to do?
Right.
Most professional police officers agreed that he did the right thing. Defend himself, defend the community.
Right. I mean, I just don't understand, right? If you don't want to get shot by a cop, don't attack the cop.
Don't commit crime.
Right.
And if he wants to arrest you, get arrested.
Right. Yeah. So I think most people, or at least in this particular case, more people are in agreement that the force that was used was justified.
Except for whatever reason, because it's political now. Except for people in Atlanta, because now killing any black person for any reason, even when they're obviously committing a crime that justifies being shot at, they disagree with it. I don't know. I really don't understand it. But specifically, in Atlanta, the mayor fired the gentleman, cop. Also, the DA complained about it. The local police person, police chief, the woman, she resigned like 2 hours after it happened.
Right. Right. And as we know, the Atlanta police chief, she resigned. And it's funny because she actually was praised nationally for the good work that she has been doing, I think up until maybe 2 weeks ago. So it's funny how fortunes can change so quickly. A couple of weeks ago, she was getting national praise.
That's because of the George Floyd situation.
Yeah. So, I mean, 2 weeks ago, she was getting this national praise, and now she's out of a job.
And the cop might be, even though we believe it's justified, you and I believe it, that the shooting, he might go to, they're putting up charges against him.
Well, I believe the cop who shot him has been fired, right? He's been fired.
Yeah, he was fired immediately.
Yeah, and you were saying that they might press charges. So we'll see. All right, so Mike, we have a couple of photos, a series of photos that you sent to me prior to our interview, and maybe you can go over with us what's going on in some of these photos, because we all know you're a very active person in the realm of politics, in the realm of news, so you get out and about quite often. So this first photo that I will show you, this is a photo of you with a candidate for Congress, right? I believe his name is Joe Calderera.
Yes, that is at campaign headquarters. The first day we actually met each other because I've been volunteering for him. I've donated to his campaign. Been a huge supporter, and I'm like, I'm gonna go out there and meet you, person to person. I want to take some pictures with you, promote you, help promote.
Okay, so just to be clear, where is Joe Calderera running for office? In which state, in which district?
New York City, Congressional District 11.
Okay.
He's being primaried the 23rd.
Okay, so he is currently in the race for the nomination to run for Congress of that district. Now, does it look like he has a good shot of getting the nomination?
He has a really good shot. The election, again, began yesterday, and the actual primary date is the 23rd, next Tuesday. Actually, which one today? He has a great shot. The problem is that the candidate is party-backed at the state level, and Trump did endorse her, but only because the party told her to. But he's actually more in line. Joe Calderera is actually more in line with Trump's policies.
So here, Joe Calderera is in a primary battle with another opponent, but this opponent is backed by Trump, correct?
In the state party as well.
Okay, so this opponent is backed by the state party and by President Trump. So I believe maybe that in that case, Joe's chances for getting the nomination are diminished.
They're diminished, of course. So there are over 400 congressmen, if I'm correct, right? I believe it's around 400 something. President Trump can endorse. He can't do his research on every single one. He's a busy man. Every state party gives him a list of people he's going to endorse. Secretary writes up a letter. He signs it, and
right. Yeah, Mike.
And I tweet about them. It's a very heavily contested primary battle, right? You can't tweet about every single person. So in this case specifically, Joe Calderera, again, has been consistently pro-Trump, pro-Second Amendment, pro-life. The opponent that Trump endorsed is pro-abortion. Her stance on the NRA is iffy, and she did not support Trump in 2016.
Okay.
And that's a 2 for Trump. In 2016, Trump won that district 2-1.
Okay. So, I mean, we all know that, it's like you said, President Trump is busy, right? He can't possibly do his research on every single candidate. So, many times, he probably just gets a list of candidates that he should be backing and he just signs off, right? But I think for the most part, though, if you do have the president's blessing, then it's probably easier for you to get the nomination. So I think it's safe to say that Joe Cal, as he's known, right? Joe Cal, he's probably on in like an uphill battle.
A very uphill battle, but anything's possible. You never know, right? I mean, when people listen to the message, they like it, so we'll do the best we can. You know, a lot of politicians, Obama, the most recent example, lost his first congressional bid, right? Abraham Lincoln lost like 3 local elections before he became president. That happens.
Yeah, I mean, but of course, those are outlier cases, right? That typically doesn't happen. I mean,
usually they drop out after the first they don't want to go back. It's a waste of time.
Well, I mean, it's kind of funny because in U.S. politics, it used to be the case that you needed to win elections in order to climb to higher office, right? But nowadays, we see a prevailing trend. So we all know Stacey Abrams, right? She was the failed candidate for governor of Georgia, right? She lost her bid to become the first female black governor of the state of Georgia.
Yep.
But yet there's talk of her joining the ticket with Joe Biden.
She became famous.
Yeah. And of course, there's the other case. In Florida, there was the candidate who ran against Ron DeSantis for governor. Yeah. He lost. Yeah. And of course, he's got his own bed of problems right now, right? He was caught with a few mysterious people. Well, with a few people he probably shouldn't have been with in a hotel room. And apparently he had overdosed, or the male escort he was with had overdosed, and he was just drunk off his mind. But of course, yeah, his name is Andrew Gillum, yes. And of course, he is he used to be a CNN contributor.
And Obama, he was endorsed by Obama. Obama had a rally for him before the election in Florida.
Right. Yeah, and actually, I mean, in the case of Andrew Gillum, he actually had a good shot at winning the race, and I believe his race with Governor Ron DeSantis was very close, very, very close. But in the end, Governor DeSantis was able to still, pull it off. But in the case of Gillum, yeah, he is another one of those figures where right after he lost, people were saying, "Oh, he's the next, rising star." So I just find it funny that nowadays in politics these days, losing doesn't mean that you're a loser. It just means that you could be a bigger winner next time.
It's the culture that we have here in the U.S. now, which is the participation trophy culture.
Right.
Participation trophy. You get a trophy even
right,
if you
yeah. So even if you lose, you get a nice shiny trophy. Oh, the biggest example of that is Beto O'Rourke. He lost his bid to. I mean, he was very close, right? He was very close in his bid to unseat Ted Cruz. Yeah, but then he lost, and then immediately afterwards, he was touted as like the next white Obama. So I just found that to be pretty funny. And of course, his presidential campaign kind of fizzled out.
He wasn't really saying anything. He was more of a figure. He wasn't really promoting any policies. And people were asking him all the time, "What are your policies?" I guess he didn't want to probably had more moderate policies. He didn't want to distance too many liberal voters.
Yeah.
Because he's from a multi-family, which is white.
Right.
It's more multi-family.
Okay. So, Mike, any predictions on who you think will win the 2020 race? Will it be President Trump or will it be Vice President Joe Biden?
It's going to be Trump, but the thing is that right now Biden is winning because CNN does really crazy things. For example, did you know the last poll they came out with, like, Biden was winning by 20 points, but the sample size was like 7% Democrat. It was crazy. It was like the worst form of like biased reporting. But the thing is that Biden does well when he's quiet and when he has pre-recorded videos that come out. When he's on live television with anybody, he closes the gap with Trump because he can't speak. He doesn't know where he is half the time. Mm-hmm. He himself says that I find myself boring. You ain't black. I feel bad for the Democratic National Convention. He's gonna have to get up there and speak as a keynote speaker. It's gonna be
right. Well, I think if he has a prepared speech, if he has a teleprompter, I think he could do decently well, right? I think it's only when he speaks. I think it's only when he speaks off the cuff that he somehow goes off script and says these wacky things. But I think if you have him on message, if you keep him on the script, if he has a teleprompter, and if all he does is just read off that teleprompter, he should be okay. He should.
But even when he reads at home, like his wife is next to him,
Right.
If he's in a prompter by himself on stage, that's a totally different. He could just have a moment where he blacks out and he doesn't know where he is, right?
Right.
I'm not a doctor. I've heard of people that knew the meditation. Just want to make clear, I'm not a doctor, but I've heard that he's in second stage dementia, Alzheimer's.
Okay, well.
That moment, he can have moments. He has had moments where he says, where am I?
Right. Well, of course.
And he has to debate Trump as well.
Right.
Why?
Right. And of course, if someone is in the early stages of Alzheimer's or dementia, that's no laughing matter. That's actually very sad.
It's not no laughing matter.
Right. No, it's actually very, very sad. And I do hope that that's not the case. I do hope that Vice President Biden is nice and healthy. But if he is riddled or inflicted with some sort of illness, then I do hope that those that are around him, those who care for him or care about him, those who really care about him, those who really care about him can actually, care for him and do the right thing. Because we all know that the people in the Democratic Party who are propping him up, they don't really give a rat's ass, right? They just want him there because to him or to them, he may be, there's two theories, right? He's either the best candidate that they have, which I think is increasingly not true, or B, he's the sacrificial lamb, right? So they want to put someone up because they think maybe Trump is not beatable this time around.
C,
But of course, wait,
this is C.
right, but of course,
Possibly.
but of course, with the onset of COVID-19, with the unemployment rate very high right now, anything can still happen, right? So that's why in politics is very exciting. It's anyone's game. It can change at any point.
You had theory A and theory B on point, but theory C is that he's gonna run Biden as the figurehead, but in reality, it's the vice president he chooses versus Trump, and Biden will step down day one and have the vice president take his place.
Right.
But the problem with that is that the vice president debate is only one debate, and it's not against Trump; it's against Pence, right? So.
Right. Well, yeah, I think that theory would make sense if his eventual vice presidential pick was someone like Hillary Clinton or Michelle Obama, right? Right. No, I mean, yeah, it would make sense if it was
It could happen.
yeah, no, I mean, it would make sense if his vice presidential pick was someone with more gravitas, someone like Hillary Clinton or Michelle Obama or someone of that stature, right? Then you can say, okay, there's a plausible argument to say that, okay, he may be just setting himself up to resign, to step down, and elevating his vice presidential pick. But as it seems so far, it seems that the main contenders for the vice presidential spot, or at least the last that I heard, were two people.
Kamala Harris?
Right, yeah, it was Kamala Harris. And no, I think Stacey Abrams is out of the running. But I think the other person is Warren. I think Warren might be the other person that's on his list. And of course, Warren is.
Right now, I highly doubt he's going to choose somebody that's not black.
Right.
Because the Black Lives Matter movement is so strong, and like 80% of Americans, I don't know where they get the statistics, agree with Black Lives Matter right now.
Right.
So I think it's probably going to be Kamala Harris. Because she's pretty popular, even though she got destroyed by Elizabeth Warren in the debate. No, sorry.
Well, the thing with Kamala Harris is that I think because of what's been happening with the protests, I think her background as a former prosecutor will actually hurt her. I think if you have any sort of association with law enforcement, right? If you have any sort of association,
Can say this though. If you don't mind my saying, they can say that because she's a former prosecutor, she can establish she understands the system and she can make it better. You can spin that. That's something good.
Yeah, you could. But I think the fact that she's a prosecutor, that the fact that she has any association with law enforcement might hurt her, especially right now. And yeah, and the fact that she's a black prosecutor is probably going to work against her. Also, I read this quote. It was from a Black Lives Matter activist or the leader of a Black Lives Matter group, I believe, in New York, where he said that, okay, blacks who become cops are no longer black; they become blue.
The problem with that is that it's been proven that in major cities, like a city like Baltimore, where there are a lot of black cops, close to 50% cops are black in those cities. That helps black people move out of poverty, right? And how are we going to take that job, right? It's a really good job. It has good benefits, it has good salary, good pay. You're going to take jobs like that and demonize them? That's not fair, right? At least no system is perfect. I was talking to Captain Ruiz of the New York City Police Department just before I was talking to you today.
Right.
We're talking back and forth. I work with him, she's a Republican. But the point is that we both agreed that no system is perfect. She said we need reform. I was like, we always need reform. No society in the history of the world has been perfect. America has come pretty goddamn close, I'd say, but we're never going to be perfect. We're always going to need reform. There's always going to be individual racist cops. Yes, of course. At both sides, there's going to be individual racist black cops, individual racist white cops. But to say that the whole system is racist is not true.
All right. Yeah. Okay. In this next photo that we see here, Mike, what is going on here? It seems that you are at some sort of demonstration.
Oh, yes. Reopen NY in mid-April. I'm in May. Yeah, mid-April. I'm home with a friend of mine, Mike G. We went there to protest the fact that that's when Cuomo said we had to wear masks.
Okay.
And he had extended the quarantine to mid-May. So we went all up there to protest that. We drove to Albany. My first time in Albany, beautiful state capital. Yes, but we were there supporting Trump and supporting reopening the economy.
Okay.
And protesting having mandatory mask policies, executive orders.
Okay, so for the viewers who may not have heard clearly, in this photo, you were up in Albany, protesting
Yes.
the mask mandate that Governor Cuomo had just enforced or prolonged,
I think enforced.
right, for like a few more weeks.
The mask mandate, he had just put it in place. They had to wear a mask
Okay.
to go inside of anywhere, and public in places that social distancing wasn't possible. And he had just extended the quarantine from May 1st to May 15th.
Okay, so you were protesting the his order to wear masks. Okay. How about in this photo right here? I believe this is you with Lou Dobbs from Fox News.
Yeah, Uncle Dobbs.
Yeah. So
Fox
what's
Business that day? That was Charles B. Payne making money with Charles Payne on Fox Business.
okay?
Socialism versus capitalism. We got invited. We got tickets, break, snacks, coffee. Got to take pictures. And once it was done with Lou Dobbs, Senator Dobbs, Charles Payne himself, the man, and what was the other gentleman that I spoke of before? We began.
Right. So this is a photo of you with
Herman
Charles.
Payne.
Yeah. So this is a photo of you here with Charles Payne. Okay. He hosts his own show on Fox News about. It's a financial show, correct?
Yep.
Yeah. And then here you are with Herman Cain, who we all know ran for president. I believe it was in 2000. Was it 2016 or was it 2012?
Oh, it was 2012, right? That was Ben Carson from 2016.
Yeah, I believe it was 2012 when Herman Cain ran for president. Yeah, because that was the year in which Governor Mitt Romney, or now Senator, had gotten the nomination. Yeah, so Herman Cain, as we know, he's the former CEO of Godfather Pizza, correct?
Yes, very wealthy, very successful.
Yeah, I've actually never tried Godfather Pizza. Have you?
No, but it was a conversation about wealth destroys America and racial injustice, and he was basically proving the point that when he was raised in Mississippi or wherever he was raised, one of those southern states, he would go to school with biscuits.
Okay.
He couldn't even afford meat, in his own words.
Right.
His family, and he, through hard work in the South, became, he went to school, worked really hard, got to a good college, and became a really successful business leader. And he says, if I can do it, anybody can do it. In America, it's not about race, it's about hard work.
Yeah, so I think there's a similar backstory when it comes to Ben Carson, or to Dr. Ben Carson, who's the current Secretary of HUD, right? I believe that he also grew up fairly poor with a single mother, but through his own sheer work and good parenting from his mother, he rose to become, I believe, the first pediatric surgeon of Johns Hopkins? Or, no, sorry, the first
brain surgeon.
Oh, sorry. The first black brain surgeon, or like the chief of neurosurgery.
Also, one of the best in the world.
Right.
Not just he was one of the best brain surgeons at one point in the world. He actually did the first successful Siamese twin brain surgery or something like that. But
right.
yeah, he's one of the best in the world.
Right.
He does neurosurgeon.
Yeah, so Ben Carson is he's another example of what you can get from hard work and from determination, right? So hard work and determination, it knows no skin color. It has no limits, right? It doesn't matter what skin color you are, what faith you are, what gender, what orientation. If you work hard, if you put in the effort, you can succeed. And that is the whole point of America.
100%. But you have to understand that you and I raised, again, immigrant parents is totally different. Caribbean American blacks and from Africa blacks, they're wealthier than the average white American. We're immigrants, different. But in those days, African Americans, slavery, back to slavery times, have been here since slavery. Their parents would raise them and say, listen, you can work hard and you can be anything you want. Now we have this culture where, especially in the Black Lives Matter community, mothers are telling their kids from a young age, no matter how hard you work, you're still black, you're not going to, there's institutional racism keeping you down. When you tell a kid something like that, that sticks with them and they believe it, right? Because you're their parent. You see, when we were kids, we were kids at one point, our parents are authority figures. We think that they're basically Superman and Superwoman, right? So when parents tell you this from when you're a young age, no matter how hard you work, you're going to go to prison, you're black, institutional racism, that changes the way that you see the world. And the reason why we have this is because in the 80s, Al Sharpton and Jesse, I forgot his name, Jesse Jackson, something like that, the Reverend, they promoted that African American movement. Before the 80s, the term African American didn't exist in the U.S. They basically started profiting for political reasons at the time, now for monetary reasons, off of creating a race war that didn't exist, still doesn't exist, between blacks and whites.
Right. Well, I believe one key structure in the Democratic Party is that they rely on identity politics very heavily. So, in their platform, in their ideology, if you are black, if you are Asian, if you are a minority, you need to vote for the Democratic Party because it is your duty to. And if you fail to do so, if you, oh my gosh, by God, if you think for yourself, right? And if you think for yourself and have a different viewpoint, then you are a traitor. Then you're not really black, you're not really Asian, you're not really American, right? You're just someone who doesn't know what you're doing.
And you know what the funny thing about that is? That there are actually videos, these videos are still up, of Malcolm X, who's a hero in the black community, who's a Republican, conservative Republican, saying that the black man's moral enemy is the white liberal. And if you vote for white liberals, you're a traitor to your community. Martin Luther King himself was also a Republican. So this concept has only been in the 90s, where 80s, more of the 90s, where people started to shift more to the Democratic Party. But even in Harlem, with the older generation of black people, African Americans, again, ancestry can be traced back to slavery in the U.S. Generally speaking, they're all Republican.
Right.
It's the younger generation that's really.
Well, let's not forget, right? Let's not forget it was a Republican president who ended slavery.
Lincoln.
Right, but we also must realize that being a Republican back then is very different than being a Republican now, and the same as being a Democrat, right?
Not really. I mean, Malcolm X in the 60s said specifically white liberals are the Negro's mortal enemy. So the white liberal Democrats were around back then. They're still around back now. It hasn't really changed much.
Right. No,
back then, in the 60s and 70s, blacks used to work harder. They used to believe they were pro-business. They used to believe in less taxes. The welfare state was started by Lyndon B. Johnson, a liberal white Democrat, who was also a racist, by the way. Did you know that Lyndon B. Johnson, the person that passed the Civil Rights Act, was a racist?
Oh, of course. I mean, everybody back then.
Every day on a daily basis.
Well,
Black
yeah.
people don't know that. Black Americans often don't know that.
I mean, it's very well documented that Lyndon Johnson threw around the N-word, pretty freely, right?
It was different accents.
Yeah, but I mean,
different, like the Tennessee accent of saying it, the Texas accent of saying it, Mississippi N-word.
Right, but I think which brings us to our next point, and I think this is right now we are currently in the midst of cancel culture, right? If you do something that's deemed wrong, that's deemed not acceptable by society, you're canceled. Your show is canceled. Your livelihood is canceled. Your Facebook account, your Twitter account is canceled. Whatever, right? So we're in this cancel culture, and this has also made its way into sort of like our history, right? In which liberals are trying to rewrite history with the taking down of the statues. Okay, I do agree that maybe some of these Confederate figures shouldn't be worshipped, right? But
no, not worshipped, but taken down is totally different.
Right.
Actually, older black people, they do not want them taken down.
Okay.
This is the younger people that want them to be taken down, because older black people understand that we need those statues that remind people of the bad history so that we do not repeat it. George Orwell, the book 1984, talks about this, right? Taking down of statues, rewriting history. This is the worst thing that could happen. Even France Macron, he said that in France, nobody's taking down any statues.
Right. Yeah. So So now we've entered this era in which a lot of people want to take down these statues, right? And I think they have their points and they have good merits, right? However, I think that the more we do this, the more we are rewriting history, and the more we rewrite history, the more we forget our mistakes, which makes it possible for our mistakes to repeat again. So,
Ronald, if you were to ask somebody, a black liberal Democrat, who are the racists throughout U.S. history? They would say Republicans. They would say, if you ask them who are KKK members, they would say Republicans. They do not know this history. The Democrats do a good job of not telling people this history. That Democrats were the ones that the GOP was founded specifically to end slavery. That the KKK was founded by Democrats that were disillusioned to harass black free slaves and Republicans that helped them be free.
Right.
They don't know this history. They don't know that up until the 60s, the Democrats were racist as heck, right? Except for John F. Kennedy. He was the only one that was pretty okay. But FDR won with KKK support. Lyndon B. Johnson was supported by the KKK. All these Democrats were supported by the KKK. They don't
Right.
know that. They don't
Well, you know, that's the thing, right? I mean,
history is turned on the statues, so nobody asks questions.
right. But I think, you know, there's a problem, and it's problematic when you try to judge the events and actions of people in the past through today's, lens. If you use today's criteria to judge the people from the past, then you know what? 99.9999% of the people in the past are going to be deemed racist. And then, so then, right, so then how far do you go? Okay, so I can certainly see that at some point, liberals will be saying, okay, we need to take down statues of George Washington because he owned slaves. Or we need to take down statues of Thomas Jefferson because he owned slaves. I mean, if you think about it, a lot of our early presidents, they all owned slaves, right? And I guarantee you a lot of them harbored, racist feelings towards blacks. I mean, this probably continues and still continues, today.
But Ron, slavery wasn't a new thing to America. Slavery has always happened. It's always happened. Every race at some point was enslaved. Everybody has an ancestor that was enslaved.
Right.
The thing is that Black Americans specifically have been taught, brainwashed by history to think it's only happened here. One. And two, they don't get that when slavery ended here, it began a tidal wave of slavery ending around the world. This is where it really, really began to end at a mainstream level, because it still happens today in certain places in Africa and in the Middle East. We don't know this, that there's still slavery today, unfortunately, but it really ended here. And another mistake that people try to make, this is really, really, really deep, is that they think that slavery is attached to race. There were white slaves and there were black slaves. And also, the concept of race being based on your skin color, that's very new. That was when we began around the mid-1700s that began. Before that, race was where you were from. Even to this day, you know that two most racist countries on earth are India and Nigeria? Did you know that?
No, I didn't. But I know that India is a very dangerous country. If you're a single woman, do not go to India. Do not take their bus because you will probably get gang raped.
But I want to get back to the point just quickly, because we're not talking about Nigeria or India, but Nigeria has 170 tribes, but they're racist towards each other, despite being the same skin color. Again, that concept of race as the skin color of somebody, that's very new. Even though Black Americans think that it's 400 years old, it's not. It was mid-1700s that began. Before that, the idea didn't exist of race based on skin color.
That's interesting.
So a lot of this history is created. It's like rewriting of history.
Right. And back to my
African American didn't exist. That word didn't exist.
Yeah, and back to my prior point that so Democrats and liberals these days, they want to do this purity test, right? In which, if you say anything that's wrong, if you believe or if you said anything wrong in your past history at any point, it can always come back to bite you. And I think that should be true, right? But not to the extent that they've done it, right? Not to the extent that they've done it, right? So, I mean, there were things that maybe comedians, have done or have said years ago, right? Yeah, I mean, there's this issue now with like blackface skits, right? That I believe, I think Jimmy Fallon and Jimmy Kimmel and a lot of comedians have done it, right? I'm not saying that it's right, but they've done it, right? So back then it was funny, but now all of a sudden it's insulting, and now there's right, yeah. So I think if we go down this path of purity, then at a certain point, every single president, up until maybe like Ronald Reagan or Bill Clinton, will be deemed racist. So before we know it, the history of the U.S. will start from like Ronald Reagan or will start from Bill Clinton, and then like that's just ludicrous, right?
But did many things that are racist. He's the one that in prison comes like millions of black people that Trump later freed. Think about that. Trump was the first that freed a lot of people that Bill Clinton and Biden helped in prison. Again, remember Biden? Predators on our streets beyond the pale. That was back in the Clinton. People don't know that. A lot of blacks don't know that. He imprisoned a lot of black people. He imprisoned more black people than any other president in U.S. history. And Obama deported more people than any president in U.S. history. And these are the two, liberal, tolerant gods that we have in our society, according to mainstream media.
Well,
But again, they might turn, like you said, they might turn on, in the future, people might turn on them too, because the truth will come out at some point.
Right. Time will tell, right? Time
Yep.
Time is the biggest revealer of truth. So time will work its way out there, and it will set the story straight.
Time is the biggest revealer of truth, unless you destroy statues and rewrite history.
Yeah, true. All right, Mike. So anyway, what do you have going on the next few weeks? I believe you have a few campaigns that you're working on.
Well, our campaign is ending for the primaries.
Okay.
So what I'm doing in the next weeks in my personal life is that I'm focusing more on, well, let's say that there's some love interest that I've taken off the table. So I want to pursue maybe a love interest or see what's going on with that. And I'm raising funds for my project. I recently just paid a consulting firm to introduce me to investors. We've got our momentum. We've incorporated as well as of last month. Politically wise, again, going to Texas for the Young American Leadership Conference, and also working with the Trump campaign on a volunteer basis. Hopefully, I can on a paid basis. That would be even nicer.
Okay, great. Okay, Mike. So I want to thank you for joining us today. We had a very long conversation about many topics, about race relations in the U.S. And I hope that people can watch what we're talking about right now and learn something, right? And they can join the dialogue, because I think in life,
that's the most important thing.
Yeah, in life, having a dialogue is the most important thing. If you don't communicate effectively with those around you, about the problems that are affecting you, about the problems that are affecting our country, that's where the problem festers, and that's where it gets worse.
Well, I want to add a point that I really want you to, I want people to hear this. There's a black gentleman that did a TED Talk, and he goes to KKK rallies. Because of him, people that are really racist left the KKK. He said, as long as you're talking, you're not fighting.
Yeah.
I want to end with that.
And I wish that were the case in today's society, in today's America. I wish a lot more people would be talking instead of fighting and protesting. I do agree with people's right to protest, right? That is part of our First Amendment right. However, when it devolves into violence and rioting and looting, that's when it becomes a problem. See, my biggest problem with the rioters is that a lot of these rioters who are rioting, who are, bashing in these stores, they're doing this harm to a lot of small business owners, right? And these are
communities.
Right, and yeah, these are people in their own community, and they end up hurting themselves. And a lot of these rioters, they're not even rioting for the cause, right? A lot of them have forgotten what the cause is. The cause was justice for George Floyd, but a lot of these looters, they're just right. But a lot of these looters, they're using this as an excuse to rob stores, right? To cause havoc, and that is just unacceptable.
Definitely.
All right, Mike. So, any last thoughts or any last words on how you think the U.S. can solve our current race relation crisis?
Like a lot of Denzel Washington said, when we see a sentence that says a black criminal man or a black criminal got shot by a racist cop, eliminate the word black, eliminate the word racist, and you don't have a racial problem anymore.
Yeah. I think a lot of it is that the media sensationalizes it because they want to sell stories, they want to get coverage, and also I think the media is trying to blow this up to try to make it as worse as possible in order to derail President Trump's re-election bid. I think that's a big part of it too.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay, Mike, thank you for joining us today. It's been a long talk. We hope you'll have the chance to join us again in the future for our future talks. So Mike, the 2020 race is coming up, and I know that we both have a lot to talk about. You and I, we are both lovers of politics. We love politics, right? So it will be a good chance for us to constantly catch up and share our thoughts. So we hope you can join our show again and more frequently in the future.
Definitely. Thank you.
Okay, Mike, great talking to you. Great seeing you. And I'll be catching you soon. All right, buddy? So take care. Bye-bye.
All right. Ciao.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for watching Real Talk with Ronnie. Once again, here on our show, we only engage in real talk, real news, in real time. If you think you'd be the subject of an interesting interview, or if you have a worthy story to tell, then please feel free to reach out to us via one of the listed contact methods. Once again, for all inquiries and bookings, please reach us using one of the methods listed on the screen. We hope you have enjoyed tonight's program. Until next time, please take care, stay safe, and God bless.